Now, initially I had considered doing a heck of a lot of let's learn the anatomy behind this last stuff, but because A, I introduced some material which forces us to compress the time, obviously, and I'm going to make it smaller, but also B, it occurred to me like you don't really need to be able to look at a fossil yourself and identify it. What you really need to know is what are the options you have to mix and match, once again, the car manual. So while it looks like we have a lot to cover, we actually have less to cover in terms of time, don't worry, than what we've covered already by quite a bit. But I do want to go over each of these areas because these are some of the key character design features often, and a lot of the finishing features you'll need when coming up with your finished creature designs. So let's leap right into beaks and lips, and we'll touch on teeth. Obviously, birds have beaks and no teeth. And mammals have lips and teeth usually, not always, but usually, and generally speaking, no beaks. By the way, before someone asks, the duck-billed platypus, for whom I do not have a picture here, does not have a beak, which makes duck-billed a really horrible name. That big, wide duck-bill looky thing is actually fleshy, and it's quite sensitive. It's not just sensitive in terms of touch, it's actually electrosensitive. When the duck-billed platypus hunts, it actually can detect the electrical signature given off by its prey inside of muck and mud at the bottom of the watery areas it lives in, and it uses that to detect prey through that bill by feel and electrosensitivity in areas where it can't see. So no beaked living mammals. That said, these are, again, sort of accidents of our history that we have beaks and no teeth, and teeth but no beaks. Oh, I do want to point out that lips are pretty common. Lizards definitely have lips. Also, as a quick note with teeth, normally teeth are covered by lips. And probably in dinosaurs that did not have beaks, they probably were too. There's some data that's been gathered that I can't say much on because it isn't published yet that will probably demonstrate this pretty conclusively. The exception, of course, being animals that live in the water a whole lot. So as you might expect, one thing I really object to in the King Kong remake is that the T-Rex-like, Tyrannosaur-like animals there all have croc-like teeth showing, and while it kind of looked cool and distinctive, I guess I can't fault them for that. Every single paleontologist I know whined and bitched about that part because they weren't living in the water. They don't do this, and so they're not likely to have teeth like that. Now, if on the other hand you had some sort of a swamp-like planet, Dagobah, I suppose, for Star Wars fans, you could totally get away with teeth like this for a lot of the creatures. Okay, however, in the past, we often get to combine these things. This, for example, is Heterodontosaurus, and it did indeed definitely have a beak on the upper and the lower jaws, but it also had tusks and chewing teeth and probably had at least a partially formed cheek coming down to about here-ish. This explodes several myths that can be too easily learned the wrong way by looking at some older textbooks or the wrong parts of the internet. If you go down like one of the dark halls of the internet, which is that a lot of people think that all animals that aren't mammals don't have variation in their teeth, when in fact variation in teeth and specialization in teeth has appeared several times in different lineages. This animal, for example, has clear incisors, clear caniniforms, and clear, they're not molars in a mammal sense, but they're clearly teeth that crush and chop more than anything else. They're more like molar-type teeth than anything else. And indeed, lots of these relatives of these guys do have even more specialized dental batteries where they pack in multiple of these teeth to make giant molar-like platforms, almost akin to what elephants do in reverse. Elephants tend to chew with only one or two functional molars in each of the upper and the lower jaws, but they make them incredibly broad and wrinkled to rub across each other. So ironically, elephants and advanced plant-eating dinosaurs come up with the same solution the opposite way, which is to create a broad platform that's very rugose that can rub past each other to grind plants up. Anyhow, so you can definitely get beaks. I think I have another one here. Oh, Mammal-like relatives do this too. We talked about Dicynodonts before. These are tusked, beaked proto-mammals, and they also would sometimes have teeth in their palate. So, brief conclusion there, but please combine beaks and teeth. You don't have to do it every time, but there's no reason you can't do it. It appears multiple times in totally independent lineages, and it's just like a strike of bad luck, if you will, that today we tend to only have one or the other. Also, tusks are really freaking common. There is a extinct dolphin, Odontobacetus, I think. Odontocetus? I'm forgetting it now exactly, but it has walrus-like tusks, and it's a dolphin. So all they took is their like dinky little leftover dolphin teeth and was able to develop a set of them into tusks. Obviously, elephant-like animals have tusks. This Dicynodont I just showed you has tusks. So did this little dinosaur that eats plants mostly. So tusks are really freaking common. Feel free to, if you need to make your creature look different or cooler or scarier, give them tusks, whether they eat plants or meat. They're okay for catching meat, but they're great for like hanging around and then using them to bite animals that want to bite you. They're great for showing off to attract the untusked ladies or even the tusked ladies. And they're great for intimidating with and or fighting with rivals if you belong to a creature species where regular interspecies or intraspecies combat occurs. And then finally, feel free to throw molar-like teeth into lots of different animals. It's really not just mammals. Now, whether you want to do true molars or more generic grinding teeth is a different question. The true specialized molars you see in say, the back of your mouth, actually those are pretty simple molars by mammal terms, or horses or whatever are kind of specialized, but really you can go chewing almost anywhere in a creature and nobody can really tell you you're wrong. It happens frequently. All right, that is literally all I have for beaks and lips. Moving on. Eyes. Once again, mammals are weirdos. Oh, and obviously this person is showing off her natural eye color with no colored contacts or retouching, I'm sure, in Photoshop. But the mammal eye, which has this like relatively small iris and of course round pupil set into a larger white area, is distinctive and probably totally wrong unless you're purposely making another mammal, like an Earth-based mammal or an obvious mammal analog creature. Nothing else should have this. Here, if you look across a wide swath of different eyes, you can get a feel for, obviously, the colors. There's fantastic variation in pupils. But notice how nothing else shows the whites of the eyes. Pupils can have a wide range of shapes, and irises can have a wide range not just of colors, but of patterns. And this is a fantastic thing I'd like to see more of. A lot of people do it for just reptile-like animals, and I can understand that. You usually see it in, like, say, lizards and crocs today. But really, if you're designing a creature, there's no reason you can't take advantage of this, even if you have fur or what have you on your animals. But, as I said, no whites. Why no whites? Why is this so weird? Well, it goes back to these bony rings people like to ask about. What are those strange bony rings in dinosaur heads? Those are called sclerotic rings. That's because it attaches to the sclera of the eye. Now, the sclera, if you've dissected a cow eye, for example, in school at some point, is the white part of the eye. And if you have a sclerotic ring, a bony part that supports the the iris is all it shows through here, and you will never see the whites of the eyes. And these rings function to let a bunch of the muscles that control eye motion insert onto there, rather than having to insert onto the sclera, which is not nearly as easy to do. And the thing is that everything has these. If you're not a mammal, you have them. Here's a pterosaur, flying reptile. Here's a gecko skull. There's the sclerotic ring on both sides. If you go back to fish, bony fish have them. So we crawled out of the water with sclerotic rings around our eyes, and everything has kept them throughout the history of life on land except mammals. So really, mammals, very strange. Of course, if you cast an even broader net, you can get some more fun design ideas. There are even a greater variety of eye designs, as well as, of course, pupil designs, looking at things like invertebrates that really probably could function just fine on a vertebrate-like animal. This is a goat eye, which has a very wide slit pupil, and that's, of course, a vertebrate. Of course, there are compound eyes, and we only find compound eyes in invertebrates on our planet, but there isn't an inherent reason why you couldn't have a planet dominated by compound-eyed animals. I will say this, they might be hard to mix and match. If you're like designing the next Avatar-like movie and you get to design a whole world's animals, once eyes show up with that standard camera hole design, they're actually really good, and they probably crowd out similarly sized animals. But if you simply gave all the animals eyes like this, you'd be okay. Another fun thing, and you see it more often in vertebrates, is putting eyes on stalks. This is a stalk-eyed fly. You can see that's the eyes way out here. Of course, snails do it. A lot of other different arachnids do it, and arthropods in general, crustaceans here, do it. And that's a fun design. It's not seen as commonly in vertebrates as you would think outside of the movies, but it is seen even right here on planet Earth. I would suggest with an animal with bones inside the body rather than on the outside, you might be better off making the stalk solid like it is here. You spelled that exactly right, Tom. Rather than Jar Jar, of course, got kind of goofy with his very invertebrate-like eyes on stalks, and that it probably added to the cartooniness of Jar Jar's animation. And also, it's probably just not terribly plausible, so I would recommend you can still have the eyes face forward or any other way you want, but I'd probably recommend designing the skull around it. An excellent question about sclerotic rings. The sclerotic rings float free in the skulls. They're not attached to the skulls by anything. They're held in by the muscles that originate in the eye socket and go to them. And those actually move when the eye moves. And they don't restrict mobility at all. Owls, for example, have excellent eye motion, as do many lizards. And that is because this ring can pivot as the muscles from inside the socket pull on it, carrying the eye with it. I bet you all like looking at Jar Jar, right? It just brings out the designers in you. Okay, so small recap there on eyes and design. As a reminder, and I know I'm beating a dead horse, but it needs to be beaten. Only mammals in the entire history of the planet lack the bony rings around the eyes, which is why we have whites of our eyes. And this might be important to us, you know, when we like gaze into the eyes of our significant other, or perhaps someone we're attempting to make our significant other. But that is a weird mammal thing that will not happen when other aliens attempt to gaze into the eyes of their wished for significant others. So if you're designing aliens or just any non-mammal, ixnay on the whites of the eyes. That said, go hog wild, please, when it comes to pupil shape, iris color, and iris pattern. Definitely, like, if you need to let your inner designer come out and be like, how creative can I be? Make the eyes a great place to go. You can vary their size, although do make sure they fit in the head okay. I do see even dinosaur drawings where the eyes are so big that like they would be bigger than half the skull, which would be a problem because another eye has to fit in there. Like they make the iris so big, basically. You have to remember that the rest of the eye has to also go behind the iris, but still, go ahead and make the eyes big or small, depending on what they're supposed to do, if they're supposed to have good eyesight or live in the dark, for example, or just look scary. And then go crazy with color and pupil shape. Okay, fur, scales, and skin. And yes, we'll talk about feathers briefly. Scales are found commonly. So obviously, put scales in anything you like when you're designing creatures. Some scales, however, are a special kind of scale that has bone in them. And these are actually called osteoderms, which means bone in skin, basically. Lizards have them. Crocs have them in these big scutes all over their body. And I wanted to point out that these are identical to the armor you see in most dinosaurs. So if you see an armored dinosaur like an ankylosaur or a stegosaur plate, they're just elaborated versions of these and these. So, if you have scaly creatures, make it spiky by all means. Fur, also really common. A lot of times people want to restrict it to mammals, but fur-like structures show up in dinosaurs, as I'll show you in a moment. It shows up in lots of, there are furry spiders, for goodness sake. It's not hard to evolve fur. It shows up a lot in radically different forms of life. By all means, if you want to, add fur to essentially anything you're designing. You don't have to, especially if it doesn't need it for some reason, but by all means do it if it would look cool. Dinosaurs. So let's talk about fur and protofeathers, because the line does get blurred a bit. Notice the nice neck contour for the Sternocleidomastoides there. Just saying. This is Beipiaosaurus. You don't need to know the name, but notice how it's not just furry, but kind of spiky. Somewhere in the transition, here's the fossil of that animal, by the way. It truly has these spikes coming out of the tail, the head, and there's more of the tail there. And it had some, I think, on one of the arms, too, which is not pictured here. Somewhere along the line, dinosaurs seem to have not gone the soft fur route as often or as commonly. They often went kind of a spiky fur route. Here's another example. This is a Psittacosaur, a beaked, two-legged relative of horned dinosaurs. And this is a picture of a real fossil, which I've seen in person. And it really has these bristle-like solid structures, which are clearly a fur-like structure. And they come down. In fact, you can see them going below the skin, but the rest of the body is covered with scales in this case. I don't recall the type of spider that was amber. It was like a white spotted something. Sorry, I don't know the technical name for that. I could look it up for you, though, if you want after class. So this tells you a few things. Fur doesn't have to be soft and fluffy. It can be bristly and spiky, which allows for fun design choices. The other thing is it can be mixed with scales. There are some people claiming otherwise, but we see very clear evidence that you can at least get proto-feather-like quill and spiky fur structures mixed with scales, no question if you want. Here's where we get into trouble. Here's a more advanced proto-feather. Something that could not be used to fly at all. This is found in Cretaceous amber, probably from a non-bird dinosaur, although we can't say for sure because it's just the feather in the amber. Once you start branching like this, you're starting to go down the more modern feather line. I am not really way comfortable because this appears to really only happen once, and especially I'm not comfortable with this. This definitely only appears once in the fossil record. Obviously, it's very successful. All living birds have it, and there are quite a few extinct birds and dinosaurs that had it, but it's so weird. I don't think it's a good design choice. If you went only this far, or maybe even a structure that was like more ribbon-like or solid but only had a few breaks, I wouldn't mind that, or fraying or something. But you should really stay away from this in alien creatures. If you got to do a flying alien creature, find a way to do it with wings that are covered with skin or something else. Even giant modified scales really would be cool and different, but not the feather thing. And I do want to point out, because someone brought it up, I went back and rewatched Avatar. They don't actually have real feathers anywhere in Avatar. There are a bunch of things with doohickeys sticking up, and some of them look more feather-like, but they are basically just ribbon-like structures on a stalk, which was a really cool solution to kind of do some of the design functions that feathers would let you do without actually using feathers. In fact, it turns out Cameron specified during the design that there couldn't be any feathers in this world. So, good call, James Cameron. He gets 2 thumbs up. Okay, let's do a quick review of epidermal or outer skin covering. In general, with your designs, scales, bare skin, bony structures in the skin appear often, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't know why I need a /. Fur evolves quite literally at the drop of a hat, so don't be afraid to put it on your creatures wherever you want and whenever you want. Feathers, however, are oddballs, and unlike fur and scales and bare skin and spiky stuff, really seem to only have a single origin in the entire history, And so true modern like flight-like feathers, really kind of a unique feature, probably a very bad choice for things coming from another planet. At the very least, try to make very different looking feathers that maybe don't serve for flight. Like I said, maybe a ribbon-like structure that's partially frayed or partially segmented, but not like a true feather. And if you do have to do a flying animal, you're really better off coming up with non-feather solutions, which we'll be talking about in more depth in week 4, so that's all you get for now. Finally, more exotic senses. You see, it turns out we have like other things to use besides our eyes or even our normal 5 senses in some cases than just what we've discussed. And these can really be a hint for people who want to go totally wild with their alien creatures. For example, echolocation. Obviously, bats have eyes, but they, especially some of the ones with giant ears, can really paint a picture and kind of see their world for, oh yeah, Charlie, you think feathers are good for that? Have you ever tried wearing a headdress to a singles bar? See how that works. And actually, that might be a good conversation starter. You're probably right. Yeah, so echolocation, a great way to see the environment without eyes. No, so yeah, let's go back real fast to epidermis stuff. Color, yeah, color is normal. Color vision evolved first. Even fish can see in color. We're biased because mammals, primitively living mammals, who spent, of course, the first 2/3 of their lives in holes or scurrying about at night, sacrifice their color vision in order to have better night vision, because when you have rods and cones, you can only have a certain number total. And if you like increase the rods, you have to decrease the cones and vice versa. So if you want to increase your ability to see details in black and white, you have to sacrifice color vision, and that's what mammals did primitively. And the mammals who can see in color have had to kind of do a secondary hack job, and the result is that mammals normally don't see in very good color, and even the ones who do see in color, like primates, don't see in as much color as like lizards and birds do. The long and the short of this is that on most planets, you can expect color vision to be what most animals have if they live during the day, and you can expect color to be common. However, bright, intense color is often expensive. In particular, blue. Blue is just outrageously expensive from a metabolic point of view to produce. And so probably is best seen in small animals or in very limited amounts. It's probably why blue jays are such irritable birds, is they've really got to eat quite a lot for their size to keep producing bright blue feathers like that. Things like bright red or bright orange or bright yellow aren't quite as expensive in terms of calories to produce, but they do come with a behavioral cost. They're easy to see. So again, when you're designing your animal, you might want to think through functionally, does it make sense that this animal needs to hide and therefore it should blend in better with a pattern but perhaps a drab colors? Or does it make more sense that it's going to want to show off? Of course, you can change this during sometimes of the year. You can have hidden flaps with colors or animals that shed their fur or feathers just to have attractive fur, well, not feathers, please, fur or scales or whatever during certain times of the year. Finally, well, that's really true. Iridescence is usually seen on either scales or feathers. Since I'm ixnaying the feathers, you don't have to worry about it there. That effect is caused by very fine ridges, not actually by coloration, and the very fine ridges reflect different colors of light depending on the angle that you're viewing the surface from. It's called the anesiotropic effect. Obviously, you can see it like on CDs and how they reflect light. All I'll say is that it's expensive, but you can certainly do it on scales. You probably can't do it on fur very easily, and definitely probably not on naked skin. Okay, echolocation. Remember that echolocation works well both in the air and underwater. Dolphins, of course, have this little receiving area called the melon. And, of course, big ears can do it too. This works so well that there are several species of dolphin that are completely blind and still function their entire lives in waters that are too murky to see in. Which means if you have an alien on another planet and for whatever reason the atmosphere is maybe very misty or constantly enshrouded in fog, you could easily have an entire planet with no eyes using echolocation. Here's another example. That's the eyes of this snake. The nostrils are actually kind of hidden up here. These are the pits. This is a pit viper, and those pits see heat. And they're pretty good at it. They see a generic heat image. Now, snakes see more resolution with their eyes as long as there's light, but it's not hard to imagine that you could have a species that might use heat rather than echolocation in places where if they couldn't use eyes. Maybe planets where it was dark for long periods of time. If you're, designing, say, the aliens for pitch black, which in fact they did something like that. Here's something crazy and fun. See this line down the side of it? This is called the lateral line system. All fish have this. I mean, all fish. You can see it on the heads, it goes down the back. Sharks have it. Even the earliest animals with legs and feet have it because they were mostly living in the water. That lateral line system lets them sense pressure changes in water. See, you can see it on these fish too. That means they can detect predators that are moving the water. They can also, in schools of fish, they can go ahead and tell where they are. This is how schools of fish turn kind of in concert. They're not like communicating with each other, not like text messaging, go now, all at once. It's just that when one of them turns up front, they can feel it. They feel the water pressure change as the fish either comes closer to them or goes farther from them, and the other fish just automatically react to that pressure change, and voila, you have a beautiful move in concert of dozens or hundreds or even thousands of animals kind of smoothly making a right turn all at once. There are downsides to this. If predators swim in from behind and the fish all break away, sometimes the fish in the middle of the breakaway don't know where to go because the pressure on them is kind of equal on both sides, and then the predator gets an easy lunch. But it's easy to imagine animals that live underwater getting by entirely with a system like this, and then maybe echolocation or something. Whales, you might have seen they release bubbles, and it traps the apparently stupid fish inside. They don't leave the bubble net. The reason they don't leave the bubble net is the bubbles, of course, change the water pressure in a way that's really scary for the fish, and so the fish end up getting stuck in the ball, and then the whales swim up through it with their mouths open and have a really good meal. Okay, so how far can you push this? I'd say really far. I'm going to show you a few Wayne Barlow shots from a book he did where he kind of came up with an entire ecosystem on another planet. Some of you may even have the book, and really, if you don't, I'd recommend looking it up and finding it. But notice none of his animals have eyes. Here we have open pits for like a heat sensing type of animal. You have it again here. You have big ones here. The fun thing is they can kind of look like eyes. And you need head-like structures, but like you, for example, wouldn't have to have the mouth necessarily in a traditional relationship to the head. You got to have somewhere for the brain to go. It'll probably be close to the main sensory gathering stuff, but it could be on a stalk, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be close to like where the mouth is per se. So, in short, if you're designing an alien, feel free to do something besides eyes. You might want to come up with a backstory. Was it misty? Was it dark? What's the reason why eyes didn't appear there? But there are tons of other senses you can do it, such as echolocation or heat sensing. But remember, if you're going to do this, you do need to like show the anatomy that solves this. You need to have big ears or a big melon type structure for sound, or big pits for sensing heat or what have you. So push this far, but don't just like leave the eyes off. Kind of come up with a solution for how they're going to sense the world around them. And finally, even with animals with eyes, but definitely animals without eyes, you can move those things away from where the mouth is. I don't have a lot of pictures here to show it off, but it's a fun idea to play with. And we're going to get on. I'll hand you over to some excellent ZBrush action here in just a sec. I want to see if there's any questions about any of this first. So if you have any, this will be the conclusion of me yapping at you, so please have at.
Give us a shout out too if you're writing questions. I know Isan just put something in, but give us a shout out. Let us know to wait for you to finish typing.
That's a good question, Ishan. You know, a didactyl track, if you're going to go for a true get as little on the ground, make your feet as light as possible sort of horse, deer, and ostrich-like solution, is going to be, it's going to combine cheapness with maximum top speed. However, it's probably, especially in a two-legged animal, sacrificing quite a bit of turning ability. And so tridactyl, three-toed feet are probably a lot more convenient for having to shift direction, is probably why most predatory theropods have maintained them. It's probably a good trade-off of turning ability in a two-legged animal and lightening the feet up a reasonable amount. You could, of course, go with either, but maybe be aware of whether you want it to be an animal that just goes fast in a straight line versus needs to be able to turn. And yes, the T-Rex in King Kong probably ought to have had lips. Honestly, there are almost no exceptions to this, that most of the teeth in an animal's mouth, that if they don't live in the water, will be covered by something to keep them moist. Because if they dry out, they crack, and that's not really a good way to roll. Anyone else?
All right, just a heads up too, guys. I think what I'm going to do, because there's a ton of information here, and so I've been taking notes and drawing. I actually think I'm going to pre-record the ZBrush component here. That way I'm going to actually be able to generate a lot more content. So I'm going to do that a little later today and tomorrow afternoon. And what you guys should be doing, the ZBrushers here should be coming up with their own designs, mixing and matching. I'm going to be doing a couple of things along with these variations that Scott mentioned. You know, we'd probably throw a satyr in there and start looking at the legs, but then also go through the different muscle guides that he gave us, the iliocostal muscles, the lat, the muscle axes that were presented. I'll probably see if I can come up with some of the skull variations and then skinning the skull. So we'll look at Dynamesh and a couple of those tools for kind of getting that done. Scales will be another one that I'll take a look at and do some variations on. But I think I'm going to need a little bit of time to just kind of soak this in and just start creating variations based on it. So if there's no other questions for Scott, let me ask you guys, is there any ZBrush, any art, any critique questions that you guys have right now before we break for next week? Remember, give a little yes, no. Actually, it makes it much easier if you guys just give me a yes, no.
Yeah, the muscles are roughly homologous. That is, they're roughly the same. The muscles pulling on the bony rings versus pulling on the eyes of mammals. Yeah, Tom, I'll put something up in the forums today or tomorrow.
That's for fun.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, I think we are good. I'm going to do ZBrush stuff, but give me about 2 days to get that to you guys. And Scott, you're already in the forums checking that out, so that's great. And I guess we can go from there.